Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. We at Rao's IAS Study Circle have come up with answer keys with respect to the UPSC GS Paper 1. Now the answer key has been provided with respect to all the sets, that is set A, set B, set C as well as set D. Now most of you who have appeared for this particular paper must have realized that as compared to last year's papers, this paper was comparatively analytical and slightly tough. So we can expect a cutoff of around 90 to 95. So those of you who are having a score of more than 90 as per this answer key, then you can straight away start your mains preparation as there is very little time for the mains examination. Now we at Rao's IAS Study Circle have tried to prepare this answer key very diligently, going through important sources for each of the statements provided by UPSC. So go through this answer key and try to match your answers, and if you overall end up scoring around 90 to 95 or even more, then straight away start your mains preparation. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading from our UPSC perspective. Now today we shall discuss the important news which has appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 5th October 2020. The news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So on this note, let's start our today's discussion from our examination perspective. The first news to be discussed appears on page number 3. It says Kejriwal to address Global Forum meet on climate change on October 7. He will highlight measures taken in Delhi to tackle pollution. Now this news becomes important as it highlights that Chief Minister of Delhi will be among the 5 urban leaders from around the world to speak at the prestigious Daring Cities 2020 conference on 7th October. And this conference, that is Daring Cities Conference 2020, is being hosted by ICLAI, that is Local Governments for Sustainability, and the city of Bonn, which is in Germany. And this will be done with the support of German government. So in this regard, you need to know about Daring Cities 2020. And this conference, which will be participated by urban leaders, will talk about tackling climate emergency, especially in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. So with respect to Daring Cities 2020, it is created by ICLEI, that is the Local Governments for Sustainability, along with the federal city of Bonn in Germany. Now the Daring Cities 2020 will showcase local climate action taken by these important leaders in their respective countries to tackle the climate emergency, including ambitious resilience building and climate mitigation efforts. And it is in this regard, this news says that Mr. Kejriwal will speak on how Delhi has responded to the existing climate emergency, air pollution crisis, including the recent innovative solutions such as the Pusa decomposer and the first of its kind electric vehicle policy in India to tackle air pollution in the capital. Thus, from my examination perspective, Daring Cities 2020 conference becomes very important. Now this conference also becomes important because of SDG 11 goals, which talks about sustainable cities and communities. Now the Daring Cities 2020 conference will also discuss about a particular model referred as the Innovative for Cities model. It mentions about participation of academia, governments, private sector as well as cities. So the Innovate for Cities model, through the important participation of these stakeholders, will effectively focus on sustainable and livable cities with respect to partnership, governance as well as financing. And this model also becomes important with respect to SDG 11 goals, that is with respect to sustainable cities and communities. Now with respect to SDG 11 goals, that is sustainable cities and communities, you must know about this particular report of Niti Aayog titled India Voluntary National Review 2020. It mentions about decade of action taking SDGs from global to local. Now Niti Aayog in its report has highlighted certain challenges and way forward in order to achieve the SDG 11 goals. The first challenge highlighted by Niti Aayog is with respect to institutional capacity of urban local bodies, and says that institutional capacities of urban local bodies still remains a challenge. Another challenge highlighted here is with respect to financial autonomy, taxation powers, and fund generation capabilities for their respective areas. So the second challenge is highlighted by Niti Aayog is with respect to the financial autonomy of these urban local bodies. And in this regard, Niti Aayog has highlighted two important aspects. First is with respect to taxation powers of these urban local bodies, and the second is the ability to generate funds. So, because of both these constraints, urban local bodies are looking at alternate sources of financing such as hybrid annuity models, municipal bonds, infrastructure investment, trusts, etc., so that they generate the ability to create funds. The third challenge highlighted is with respect to air pollution in cities. The report highlights that being home to 15 out of the 20 most polluted cities in the world, the challenge of pollution, particularly air pollution, demands immediate attention in the country. The next challenge highlighted here is to reduce larger ecological footprints even in wealthy cities. Now, here you need to understand the concept of ecological footprints. Now, ecological footprints is basically difference between demand on nature and supply by nature. Now, ecological footprint measures how much nature we have and how much nature we use. That is, how much nature is in supply and how much nature is demanded by human beings. Now, in this regard, you need to know not only about ecological footprints but also about biocapacity. So, the ecological footprint is an accounting measure with respect to demand and supply of nature. On the demand side of ecological footprint, it not only measures the ecological assets that is required for the population to produce, but also how the nature absorbs the waste, especially carbon emissions. So here it says that ecological footprint tracks the use of six categories of productive surface areas, namely cropland, grazing land, fishing grounds, built up land, forest area and carbon demand on land. Whereas on the supply side, a city, state, or a nation's biocapacity represents the productivity of its ecological assets, including these six categories of productive surface areas. And these areas, especially if left unharvested, can also absorb much of the waste we generate, especially our carbon emissions. So, overall, biocapacity represents the productivity of a ecological asset, including the productivity of cropland, productivity of grazing land, forest lands, fishing grounds, as well as built up land. So, effectively, ecological footprint measures how fast we consume resources and generate waste compared to how fast nature can absorb our waste and generate new resources. Now, here there are two more terms which you need to know. First is ecological deficit, and second is ecological reserve. Now, it further highlights that both the ecological footprint and biocapacity are expressed in global hectares. Now, with respect to ecological deficit, it says that if population's ecological footprint exceed region's biocapacity, that is ability to produce ecological assets, then the region runs an ecological deficit. That is, if we consume more resources and generate more waste which cannot be absorbed by nature and recycled by nature, then in such situation we have reached ecological deficit. Now, with respect to ecological reserve, it says that if region's biocapacity, that is ability to produce ecological asset, exceeds the ecological footprint, then it has ecological reserve. So here it means just the reverse of ecological deficit. So it is in this regard, this fourth challenge becomes very important. It says that some large and wealthy cities may have well managed resource system but also have larger ecological footprints. So there is a need to reduce ecological footprint, especially in large and wealthy cities. Another problem with respect to increasing a larger ecological footprint is that it also increases climate change impacts, which further increases the vulnerability of cities and put these cities under further stress, especially for the poor living in such cities. So overall, there is a need to reduce ecological footprints in cities, and this is one of the greater challenge with respect to achieving SDG 11 goals. And lastly, the fifth challenge is to reduce congestion in cities and related problems which comes along the problem of congestion in cities. It says to reduce congestion and the interlinked problems that come with it. Integrated and spatially distributed urbanization with an emphasis on small and medium cities and towns along with promotion of linkages with rural areas. So it also mentions about linkages with rural areas. Now, with respect to linkages with rural areas, the government needs to come up with faster and cleaner mode of transport. So, tackling these challenges are important to achieve SDG 11 goals. Now, this news becomes important both from our prelims as well as mains point of view. From our prelims examination, this topic becomes important with respect to current events of national importance and also with respect to general issues on environmental ecology as well as biodiversity. And from your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 1 as well as GS paper 3. Under GS paper 1, it specifically gets covered under urbanization, their problems and remedies, and also effects of globalization on Indian society. And with respect to GS paper 3, it gets covered under conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, as well as environmental impact assessment, especially with respect to understanding the concept of ecological footprints, biocapacity, as well as ecological deficit and ecological reserve. So with this, let's move on to our next news analysis. Now, the next news to be discussed appears as an editorial on page number 6. It says, Mixed signals. The latest GST data give cause for hope of a sustainable momentum in the growth. Now, this editorial highlights that recently, after restrictions with respect to lockdown have eased, economic activities in the countries have picked up, and because of this, gross revenue collections with respect to GST in September 2020 has increased to rupees 95,480 crores. Now, this is a good sign with respect to economic recovery, especially post COVID 19 lockdown. Further, the editorial also says that this is also a very good sign, especially prior to the festival, as during the period of festival, consumption is high. And because of high consumption, there is increased economic activity. And with respect to increased economic activity, this editorial says that of late there has been witnessed an increase in manufacturing and also increase in sale of automobiles. So all these aspects cumulatively signal an increased economic activities, especially after restrictions of lockdown were eased. Now, this increase in economic activity is also reflected in Purchasing Managers Index, that is PMI. Now, PMI is an indicator of business activity both for the manufacturing sector as well as for the services sector. So, with respect to manufacturing, even GST revenue from import of goods have increased. And this increment of GST revenue from import of goods is higher as compared to previous year. Now, this signals greater import of inputs which are required or needed for manufacturing purposes. So, overall, we can say that manufacturing activity, especially after lockdown, is slowly increasing in India. Now, as for the merchandise trade data from the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, it signals or mentions about a greater Indian purchases, especially in September 2020, for pharma, which has increased to 28%, and for metal ores, which has increased to 43%. So, this merchandise trade data also signals the reason for increase in GST collection. Now, the second part of this editorial mentions about certain key areas of concerns which the government must focus on. The editorial says that this slight increase in GST collections, especially prior to the festival season, must be seen from the fact that in September 2019, that is last year, GST collections had slipped to 6 months low and also contraction was witnessed. So the editorial says that there are certain key concerns which the government must look into. First is the fact that how long will this positive trend of increased GST collection will last. That is, whether this increased GST collection will also last post festival season, which is yet to be seen. The next point of concern highlighted in this editorial is that as GST receipts or GST collections for first 6 months are 25% lower as compared to last year, then in such situation, what should be the GST collection which is expected by the government for the next 6 months? And from this point, the third point of concern is the fact that the Finance Ministry in the budget of 2020-21 announced a 12.8% increment in GST receipts or GST collection. However, considering the present circumstances, especially because of COVID situation, it is difficult to achieve. So here, the government actually needs to reassess their GST collection considering the impact of COVID-19, as reassessing GST collections will also give more clarity to the central government, and this clarity will also help the central government to transfer GST collections to states as part of their compensation fund. So these are some of the important concerns which have been highlighted in this editorial, especially with respect to increased GST collection. As to how long will this positive trend of GST collection or increased GST collection last, and whether the increase in GST collection will be able to sustain for the next 6 months, and based on the revised target or revised assessment of GST collection, the central government need to reassess or recalibrate GST collection so that it has more clarity not only with respect to transfer of GST collections to states but also to maintain center state relationship, as recently there has been certain deficit especially between center and states because of this aspect of GST compensation funds, that is transfer of GST collections from center to states. Now, from your prelims perspective, this topic gets covered under economic and social development, whereas in your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 3, especially with respect to Indian economy as well as inclusive growth. So, with this discussion, let's move on to our next news analysis. The next news to be discussed appears as an article on page number 6. It says, Transforming Business and the Insolvency System. Further streamlining of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code can instill more confidence in foreign and local investors. So, overall, both the authors in this article have mentioned that Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016, along with the Goods and Service Tax regime, has helped India to improve ease of doing business rankings, as the present ranking is 63, increase foreign direct investments, especially in the year 2019-20, as FDI investment rose to 20% to $74.5 billion, and it has also helped India to emerge as a Make for World platform. So, considering these benefits with respect to both insolvency and bankruptcy code as well as goods and service tax regime, that is GST tax regime, this article has highlighted about three important aspects. First, it's with respect to the fact that how has insolvency and bankruptcy code helped India to improve ease of doing business rankings. Now, ease of doing business rankings is published by World Bank. Second, the authors have suggested for other measures which will be needed to improve investment climate in India. And third, the authors have mentioned about the challenges which needs to be overcome in order to make India an attractive investment destination. So in this regard, the authors have clearly stated that the role of insolvency and bankruptcy code is very important in order to improve investment climate in India. So let us understand the viewpoints of the author as to how insolvency and bankruptcy code has helped India to improve ease of doing business rankings. Now, according to the authors, the insolvency and bankruptcy code has two key drivers. These two key drivers are, first, short time bound process as provided by the IBC code, and second, prioritizing resolution and not liquidation of any company. So the authors believe that both these aspects have cumulatively helped to improve investment climate in India, as both have helped cumulatively to reduce backlog of cases, especially with respect to insolvency proceedings in the country. Further, the author says that implementation of insolvency and bankruptcy code has allowed credit to flow in India more freely as compared to what was the case earlier. So, flow of credit into India in a more free manner has also promoted investor as well as investee confidence in the country. That is, those who are investing in India and companies or organizations in which these amounts are getting invested. Further, the author says, since IBC prioritized resolution and not liquidation of companies, and this overall has instilled greater confidence in the corporate sector because of the fact that IBC has streamlined insolvency process in a sustainable, efficient and value retaining manner by following corporate resolution methodology. Now, this improved investment climate in India has helped in improving India's ease of doing business rankings to 63rd place, as India has a total score of 71. Now, earlier, India's ease of doing business ranking stood at 77, which is now at 63rd place. So, clearly, this investment climate has helped India to improve its ease of doing business ranking, which is published by the World Bank. Now, one of the component of ease of doing business ranking is resolving insolvency. And at this front as well, India's rank has improved to 52 in 2019 as compared to 108 in 2018. Now, this can be considered a significant jump of 56 places. As you can see, with respect to India, its ranking with respect to resolving insolvency is at 52. So we understand that India has definitely improved its ranking with respect to ease of doing business, not only with respect to its overall ranking, but also with respect to its ranking with respect to resolving insolvency. Now, the other components of ease of doing business are enforcing contracts, in which India stands at 163, trading across borders, in which India stands at 68, paying taxes, in which India stands at 115, protecting minority investors, in which India stands at 13. With respect to getting credit, India stands at 25, registering property at 154. For getting electricity, India is ranked at 22, dealing with construction permits at 27, and starting a business at 136. And this cumulatively give India an overall ease of doing business ranking at 63 for the year 2019. Now, apart from this, the article says that even the recovery rate for India has improved nearly threefold, that is, three times, from 26.5% in 2018 to 71.6% in 2019. And also, the overall time taken in recovery also improved nearly three times, coming down from 4.3 years in 2018 to mere 1.6 years in 2019. So, these can be said to be some of the reasons as to why the authors believe that IBC has helped to improve investment climate for India. And this overall increases investors' confidence to invest in India. Now, apart from this, the author also mentions about other measures which will improve investment climate in India. And one of the other measures, as suggested by the author, is to implement the Commercial Courts Act 2015, as it provides for constitution of commercial courts, commercial appellate courts, commercial division and commercial appellate division in the high courts for adjudicating commercial disputes of specified value. Further, the author says that there is also need to remove over 1,500 obsolete as well as old laws which are no longer required or which at times may create certain impediments for business sentiments in India. So these are the other measures which needs to be taken care of by the government in order to improve investment climate in India. So considering all these aspects, let us go through the challenges which still needs to be overcome to make India a more investment friendly climate. In this regard, the author highlights that pending cases in courts needs to be reduced. As of now, there are roughly 4 crore cases which are pending for final judgment. So this is one aspect where India needs to improve further. Now, another important aspect highlighted here is the fact that the government need to decriminalize minor offences, and there shall be only penalizing power with respect to these minor offences. So here the government of India along with Niti Aayog is working to decriminalize minor offences. And this will significantly reduce the risk of imprisonment for actions or omissions that are not necessarily fraudulent. Now, here the government is trying to differentiate between two kinds of offences. First is with respect to such offences which are made in good faith or by mistake. And the other type of offences is one which is done intentionally with bad faith. So, the government and Niti Aayog is trying to work together to differentiate between these two kind of offences, whereby they intend to penalize this particular offence, that is offence made by mistake, and criminalize the offences which is done intentionally having bad faith in mind. Now, imposing penalty or penalizing an offence refers to imposing fine on such offences, which are generally done by mistakes, whereas offences done intentionally having bad faiths needs to be criminalized. That is, a person can be arrested for a certain period of time. So the author says that separating these kind of offences will further improve investors' confidence in the country. Now, another important aspect highlighted here is that the report of Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee has suggested to speed up resolution process in the country, as any kind of substantial delay leads a company closer to liquidation rather than resolution. Now, here we have seen that the purpose of IBC is to go for or prioritize resolution and not go for liquidation. So, it is in this regard the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee has suggested to speed up the resolution process as substantial delay leads a company closer to liquidation rather than resolution. And any delay in finalizing operational control also results in low value of liquidation. That is, any delay in the entire process reduces the value which a company could have got if the company was liquidated. Now, liquidation of a company here refers to selling the assets of the company. So overall, it says that delay in finalizing operational control also result in low value liquidation due to high economic rate of depreciation. So all these are some of the challenges which needs to overcome in order to make India a much better investment friendly climate. So, as a way forward, the authors have highlighted the need of introducing technology. So, the author says that given the need for social distancing and suspension or limitation of physical hearings, a concerted effort should be made to enhance the role of digitally conducting all processes and hearings to achieve greater efficiency in present times. So, considering the limitations imposed by COVID, the authors have suggested to use technology to solve insolvency cases or to initiate insolvency proceedings, as using technology will not only increase access for litigants but will also help to solve pending cases. So the author says that bringing in technology would help ease of access to justice and will also greatly help ease of doing business from a process and efficiency standpoint as well. So overall, the author says that introducing technology will not only increase access for litigants but will also improve ease of doing business climate in the country, as ultimately conducting insolvency proceedings digitally will help to solve pending cases. So overall, the authors have concluded by saying that the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code has provided a major stimulus to ease of doing business, enhanced investor confidence, and helped encourage entrepreneurship while also providing support to the micro, small, and medium enterprises. So, in this aspect, further streamlining and strengthening of IBC will surely instill greater confidence in both foreign investors as well as domestic investors, as both these foreign and domestic investors will look towards India as an attractive investment destination. So this is the way forward as has been provided in this particular article. Thus this article becomes important primarily from the perspective of Indian economy and improving investment climate in India. So from our prelims perspective, it gets covered under economic and social development, and in our mains, it gets covered under GS paper 3, especially with respect to Indian economy and inclusive growth, and also with respect to GS paper 2, especially with respect to statutory, regulatory, and various quasi judicial body. So with this discussion, let's move on to our next news analysis. The next news to be discussed appears as an article on page number 7. It says, a commission misguided. The National Child Rights Body seems to be deriving its priorities from the political agenda of the day, rather than doing what is actually stated in the statute. So, this article has criticized the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights and has said that it is not doing what is actually required by the Commission but rather is following the political agenda of the day as set by the government. So, in this regard, you need to know about the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, including its functions, so as to understand the various criticism which has been provided in this particular article. So, the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights was set up under the Commission for Protection Child Rights Act of 2005 and accordingly is a statutory body under the administrative control of the Ministry of Women and Child Development. So, these aspects becomes important with respect to our prelims examination. It says that the Commission's mandate is to ensure that all laws, policies, programs, and administrative mechanisms are in consonance with the child rights perspective as enshrined in the Constitution of India and also the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Further, this act defines child as a person from the age group of 0 to 18 years. Another important point highlighted here is that the Commission visualizes a rights based perspective flowing into national policies and programs along with nuanced responses at state, district, and block levels. So, overall, we understand that the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights is a statutory body set up under the Commission for Protection of Child Rights Act 2005. So, the Commission for Protection of Child Rights Act 2005 provides for the constitution of National Commission as well as State Commission for Protection of Child Rights. So, the Act provides for a Commission for Protection of Child Rights at national level as well as at state levels. Further, the Act also provides for Children's Court for providing speedy trial of offences against children or for violation of child rights. So, in this regard, let us go through some of the important functions and powers of the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights. It highlights that it can examine and review the safeguards provided by or under any law for the time being enforced for the protection of child rights and also recommend measures for their effective implementation. And in this regard, the Commission can present to the central government working of those safeguards for children. Next, the Commission can inquire into violation of child rights and also recommend initiation of proceedings in such cases. Next, it can examine all factors which inhibit the enjoyment of rights of children affected by terrorism, communal violence, rights, natural disaster, domestic violence, HIV/AIDS, trafficking, maltreatment, torture and exploitation, pornography and prostitution, and also the Commission can recommend appropriate remedial measures for such children. Further, the Commission also has powers to look into the matters relating to children in need of special care and protection, including children in distress, marginalized and disadvantaged children, children in conflict with law, juveniles, children without family, and children of prisoners, and also recommend appropriate remedial measures for such children as well. Further, the Commission can study treaties and other international instruments and undertake periodical review of existing policies, programs, and other activities with respect to child rights, and accordingly make suitable recommendations to the government with respect to implementation of any of these international instruments or of any policy in the best interest of children. Further, the Commission can undertake and promote research in the field of child rights and also spread child rights literacy among various sections of the society and also promote awareness with respect to safeguards of such children. Further, the Commission can inspect or cause to be inspected any juvenile custodial home or any other place of residence or institution meant for children, which is under the control of either central government, state government, or any other authority, including any NGOs or institution run by a social organization. Further, the Commission also have power to inquire into complaints and take suo motu notice of matters. Now, suo motu notice refers to taking action by oneself. So, the Commission can take action by oneself and also inquire into complaints with respect to deprivation and violation of child rights, non implementation of laws providing for protection and development of children, non compliance of policy decisions, guidelines or instructions aimed at mitigating hardships to ensuring welfare of the children, and also to provide relief to such children. Further, the Commission can also take up such other matters which the Commission thinks is necessary for the promotion of child rights and any other incidental matters relating to the above provided provisions. However, the Commission shall not inquire into any matter which is pending before a state commission or any other commission duly constituted under any other law for the time being in force. So these can be said to be some of the important functions and powers with respect to the National Commission for the Protection of Child Rights. Now, another important power which we must know is with respect to power relating to inquiries. It says that the Commission shall, while inquiring into any matter, shall have all powers of a civil court trying a suit under CPC, that is Code of Civil Procedure. And this regard have the following powers, namely, the Commission can summon and enforce the attendance of any person and examine them on oath, can enforce discovery and production of any document, can receive evidence on affidavits, requisition any public record or copy thereof, that is, demand any public record or copy from any court or any government office, and also issue commissions for the examination of witness or documents. So, these are some of the important aspects highlighted with respect to powers of the Commission. Further, the Commission also have the power to forward any case to a magistrate having jurisdiction to try the same. So we understand that the Commission has a wide range of power under the Protection of Child Rights Act. Further, the Commission shall also submit an annual report to the central government as well as to the state government concerned, and at times can also submit certain special report on any matter, which according to the Commission is very important for the government to see. Further, the central government as well as the state governments concerned shall cause the annual and special reports of the Commission to be laid before each House of Parliament or state legislatures respectively. So here what you need to understand is that the central government and the state government shall cause the annual report as well as the special reports of the Commission to be laid before the Parliament as well as respective state legislatures. Further, the Act also provides for a children's court. It highlights that for the purpose of providing speedy trial of offences against children or violation of child's right, the state government may, with the concurrence of Chief Justice of the High Court, by notification, specify at least a court in the state or specify for each district a court of session to be children's court to try the said offences. And the state government shall also provide for a special public prosecutor, that is a lawyer, or appoint an advocate who has been in practice as an advocate for not less than 7 years as a special public prosecutor for the purpose of conducting cases in court, especially under this particular act. So these are some of the important provisions with respect to Commission for Protection of Child Rights Act 2005. So after understanding the important provisions of this act, let us go through certain concerns which has been highlighted in this particular article. Now the first concern highlighted here is that the Commission has directed the district magistrate to deinstitutionalize child care institution. Now deinstitutionalization of child care institution will have a very bad impact on some children who were living in such child care institutions away from physical abuses of the family. So the news highlights that this action of NCPCR, which has directed the district magistrate to deinstitutionalize child care institutions, will send children back to places where they were abused. And this action of NCPCR has raised concern as most of these children are in child care institutions due to abusive conditions in their family. So now what will happen is that these children will again be forced to go back to their abusive families where it is possible that these children may be abused further. So the article says that without proper investigation, deinstitutionalizing of child care institutions will place the children again at grave risk of abuse, exploitation as well as neglect. Further, the article highlights that this action suggested by NCPCR, especially to deinstitutionalize child care institution, exhibits sheer inadequacy of current system to organize adoption and foster care. So basically the article says that the system or the setup does not provide for adoption and foster care of such children. Now another point highlighted in this article is that raids done on these childcare institutions at the behest of NCPCR is against their preview, especially with respect to such raids which have been done to check their foreign funding. That is to check out whether these social institutions or NGOs who are running childcare institutions are receiving foreign funds or not. So in this regard, the article says that some NGOs involved in child care protection are raided by the government in order to establish whether foreign funds have been misused in any manner by such organizations. So monitoring of the FCRA regulation is not within the mandate of NCPCR. Now we have already gone through the powers and functions of NCPCR, and it does not mention about ordering raid, especially with respect to finding out whether any institution is receiving foreign funding. Next article says that raids conducted at these child care institutions are targeted against critics of the government. So here the article highlights that raids done on child care institutions seem to target individuals or organizations who have been outspoken in the criticism of the central government on issues such as National Register of Citizens, that is NRC, or the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. So these are some of the concerns which have been highlighted in this article, especially with respect to powers of NCPCR. Now there is another point which has been raised by the author in this article. The author says that what could have NCPCR done to rehabilitate children amid the COVID-19 pandemic rather than following the diktat of the government. Now the author highlights that because of COVID-19 pandemic, The issues of child malnutrition, child labor, child abuse, child marriage, as well as mental illness has increased. So, in such situations, NCPCR should have shown concern for the gross violation of children's rights during the lockdown and in its aftermath. And accordingly, NCPCR could have taken certain remedial measures to address these situations. So, the author says that in such situation, NCPCR should have shown concern for the gross violation of children's rights, especially during the lockdown and in its aftermath. So, here NCPCR should have rather taken a suo motu action against these abuses against children. Next point highlighted here is that NCPCR should have used its authority to protect children amid pandemic, where the author says that the NCPCR could have used its authority and power to issue recommendations to relieve these grave conditions by reiterating the need for strengthening all child related institutions, including government as well as non government institutions, and should have ordered relief measures for such children. And lastly, the author says that NCPCR should have also taken action by itself against increasing instances of crime against children, girls, as well as women, including crimes of rape as well as murder. So, in this regard, the author highlights by saying that amid increasing cases of rape against Dalit children, NCPCR should have taken suo motu cognizance, that is, cognizance by oneself, and have protected the rights of children who are abused in coordination with district authorities. So, these are the actions which NCPCR could have taken amid the COVID 19 pandemic. Now, this topic of National Commission for Protection of Child Rights becomes important both from the prelims as well as mains perspective. In your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 2, especially with respect to the role of NGOs as well as welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population as well as laws. And in the prelims, it gets covered under Indian polity and governance and also with respect to rights issues. Now, after our discussion, this becomes your practice question for the day. So, the question is, consider the following statements about National Commission for Protection of Child Rights. Statement 1. The Commission has the power to inspect juvenile custodial home. Second, the Commission has powers of civil court while inquiring any matters of child abuse. Statement 3. Special reports of the Commission shall not be laid before each House of Parliament or state legislature concerned. So the question is, which of the statements given above is correct? Options are A, 1 only, B, 2 and 3 only, C, 3 only, and D, 1 and 2 only. Now coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, consider the following statements with regard to Atal Tunnel. First, it is built in the eastern Pir Panjal range of Himalayas. Yes, this is correct. Second, it has been built just below the Rohtang Pass to make the Leh-Manali highway an all-weather highway. No, this is incorrect as it is not built just below the Rohtang Pass. Third, it has been constructed by Border Roads Organization. Yes, this is correct. So the question was, select the correct option. So here the correct option is C, that is 1 and 3 only. So with this we come to end of today's discussion. Thank you.